series for a conversation on representation in media. Tune in. Welcome to our second episode of our 7-9 podcast. We are so happy to have you with us. Today we'll be talking about Asian representation in media and the importance of it. And
we will be talking about the importance of allyship as Asian Americans in the US.
It takes something to get into the room in the first place, you know. Don't 100% like compromise your beliefs. Like, that's not what I'm saying either. Because I think having firm beliefs and like still being in that room is one of the most like faithful and strongest things that you can do. So speaking of like getting into the room, let's kind of like talk about Asian American representation in media and what that means. And if our viewers don't know, I don't know who's watching this, but like if you don't know, we're 7-9 Media and we care a lot about representation in media, specifically Asian American representation, because we're all Asian, but we love all kinds of representation. But why we're called 7-9 Media is because of Revelation 7-9. It's like where everyone of all nations, all tribes, all tongues like come together and worship God. And so I think that is the picture that we want to see on the silver screen, because it's the picture that we see in heaven. It's the picture we see in the Bible. And so that's why we think it's important and why we love to talk about Asian American representation. So who wants to start?
I mean, yeah, so Asian American representation is definitely a super important thing to me. Like my first year of film school and like my film aesthetics class, I wrote a paper on like Asian American representation in cinema, and I was trying to think of movies about Asian Americans, but the only one I could think of was the Joy Luck Club, and that was like in the 90s, and like the only other thing I could think of was all Asian cast was Mulan, but that's animated, and like they're not even all Asian, and it's actually in Asia, and that's not an Asian American story. And when I was like asking other people, they were like, oh my gosh, what's the name of that movie with Kung Fu? It was like an older movie, but then they remade it with Jaden Smith. What?
Oh, Karate Kid.
Yeah, Karate Kid. Like, oh, a friend brought up Karate Kid. I was like, that's like actually in China, and it's a black kid at the forefront. It's not even an Asian kid at the forefront. I've probably been like aware for a while of the lack of like Asian representation. And I mean, like when Crazy Rich Asians came out, I was so hyped, so into it, so glad so many people like turned out to see it, because I think so many people were like, waiting to see it, and just older generations of Hollywood weren't like aware, I guess. Like I had a professor during that time who was like talking about how surprised she was that was doing so well at the box office, and this like Melissa McCarthy movie, what was like Happy Time Murders or something, like a movie I had never even heard of, like she thought it was going to do super well, and she was so surprised. Like so many people like showed up to Crazy Rich Asians, and like all my classmates were like, no, we all expected this. Like it's like a generational difference maybe, and like also an ethnic difference, but it's definitely exciting to see like this whole new wave of representation going on, and seeing like now we have Henry Golding showing up in a bunch of different things, and Constance Wu in a bunch of different things, and Gemma Chan is like in Immortals. Is that like the Marvel thing she got casted in? Yeah, it's like super exciting. And now we're having an Asian superhero with Simu Liu, right? He's like the star of it. So that's super exciting.
I cried when I found it.
It was so exciting. Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely great to see this new wave, although I am wondering how like this whole COVID thing now with the uptick in Asian racism, how that will affect things. Hopefully not, but also Hollywood's still getting back on its feet, so we're gonna see how that turns out. But it's definitely a super important thing to see yourself represented on screen, even subconsciously. Like as a kid, you might not be like aware that all you're seeing are like all these like white people or whatever on screen, but it's definitely really important with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like the ABC show. Like the main girl, she's like half Chinese and half white, and it's like acknowledged and talked about like in the storylines. And like even thinking about it, like I get emotional, because like the first time I was like cognitively like aware of a character who's like mixed, and it was like talked about and mentioned, and you saw her like parents being different. So that was like, it's just like a super important thing, even when you're like older, to see yourself represented. Just like know you're being seen and acknowledged is like, it's just, I think, a healthier way of an upbringing. So definitely all for Asian American representation.
Well, read my thesis. It's 30-something pages of Asian American representation. And because I've written 33 pages, I don't know where to start. I promise I won't just recite it. I actually don't even remember what I turned in. Like, I couldn't tell you. I
Please
did
do,
not write
actually.
that. Don't tell my professor. Okay, I guess I'll work backwards, starting with what Nicole ended on. Particularly as someone who wants to go into acting, I couldn't tell you when I had an actual Asian American woman actor that I could look up to. Obviously, like, there were some names in the game at that point, but I couldn't tell you. So for me, the show that really like helped me solidify that it's actually possible is Hawaii Five-0. It was also really big at my church at the time, when the new version just started. Also because we knew like all of their shooting locations, and a lot of us had been to them just because Oahu's not that big. So that was really fun. But watching Daniel Day Kim and Grace Park on that was like, oh wait, like it's possible. Like, it's a stretch because like I'm not Korean, but I'll take it. Like, she's still Asian. Like, that's what I have right now for a role model. Then that's great. I think part of why it's hard for families and parents to sometimes, this is just a guess, but like to support it is because there's not that many people, Asian or Asian Americans out there actually being successful. So it's like, it makes sense. Why wouldn't you want to like launch your kid into something where you only see like two people who have two lines? That's scary. Like, I don't even know what that feels like as a parent to do that. So that's why it's also so important to see Asians, because it's like the more you see, the more you realize it's actually doable. They talk about the glass ceiling a lot for like women in business. It's like they can't get past this like certain point. For Asians, they actually call it the bamboo ceiling. Haha, surprise. And I guess speaking to the fact that we are all women and Asian American in entertainment, what neither of those models actually accounts for is how hard it is, because you not only have the bamboo ceiling to account for, you also have the glass ceiling, and that struggle of being a woman also adds to everything that we know of just being a struggle of being an ethnic minority trying to get into Hollywood. Oh, I could talk about this for days. I guess also like content wise, I think there needs to be also this bigger distinction, at least my opinion, between the Asian experience and Asian American, not because one is better than the other, but they're not interchangeable. And I think that's also what we see a lot happening, of like, oh, it's an Asian person, so it's Asia, or like this Chinese American has the same experience as a Chinese, and so suddenly you're like mixing experiences and stories, and you're not holding integrity to actually what that identity means. And then you get into the other issue of, this happened to me. I had someone approach me about auditioning for a Japanese role. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, like it's an Asian role. Then I realized what I was doing is literally the problem that a lot of casting directors do, which is I was going to put myself out there to be casted as someone who's Japanese, and I'm not Japanese. Culturally, sure, maybe, but that's a different conversation than actually how you cast. And that's just a bigger issue of like, you can't just cast any Asian person as any Asian ethnicity. And so, yeah, I think those are more like and nuances, but important. And I love Crazy Rich Asians. We should also talk about that later.
I'm adding it to the list. Yeah, no, I really appreciate what y'all are saying, and I agree with like all of it. I think my experience might be a little bit different because I'm not necessarily, I don't know how to explain this. Okay, but basically, I really liked movies growing up. I liked musicals. I liked, like all the cheesy things. I was in theater when I was in middle school, and in high school I did like choir. Yeah, I was in choir since like literally kindergarten. I played Gabriella from High School Musical when I was like in 5th grade, and that was like the extent of my acting. But like it was always like a hobby for me, and I never really knew that this was a thing people could do. I knew there's like whatever majors out there, but I was like, whatever. Like people don't actually do that. And then I was like, let alone like someone like who like me, and honestly I was my own worst enemy, because it's like it wasn't people necessarily telling me like, you're Asian, you can't go to art school or whatever. Like it was never that. It was always me telling myself like I can't because of these reasons or because of like whatever. And so it was super weird going to Chapman and asking people like what their majors were, and there's like Asian girl like, oh, I'm in Dodge, or like I'm a creative like producing, or like I'm a freaking screenwriter. And I was like, what? Because I was like, that was literally so shocking to me. Like, I don't know, I can't really explain it, because it was like halfway through my sophomore year that I was like, oh my gosh, like people actually like really love this, and people actually like do this. Something that I remember after Crazy Rich Asians came out, I like went to go see it and stuff like that, and I asked my mom, the same mother who was like don't you like why don't you like biology? I was like, what would you say if I wanted to go into film, or like what would you say if I like wanted to do entertainment? She was like, do it. And I was like, what? I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, that's so weird. And like, because I honestly think it was like Crazy Rich, because she like brought up Constance Wu, she like brought up Gemma Chan, and she's like, you like what about these people? And I was like this is why it's important, because there's so many young kids out there who love this, or like think this is their passion. And it's also, I also don't want to discount people who like love science, you know what I mean, like who love math, or who love whatever, because those are like equally as important. I just think sometimes society assigns more value to like STEM things than like art things, which is like no one's fault, but you know, society. So I like came in as a psych major, and I then added a music major, because that's like what I've always done, is like I sang, I was in choir and stuff like that. But I really, really liked movies, and I really, really liked talking about them and like hearing about them and stuff like that. And so it's interesting like being in a place where I am, where I feel like I have like some regrets of like, if I had known this earlier, I could have prepared better for like what I studied in college. It's interesting now, because my brother now goes to Chapman, and he also loves movies, and like my dad likes movies too, and that's like where we get it from, but he's a car salesman. And so like I asked him, I was like, what do you wish like you could have done? He was like, I wish I like went to sales and like entertainment, or like I wish I did marketing somewhere else instead of like doing like car things. And I was like talking to my brother, and I was like, what are you thinking? And he was like, I think I'm gonna try for Dodge. And I was like, freaking do it. You know, because I was like that was me. I like wanted to, but I was like scared the whole time that I was in college, because I was like, I'm not qualified. I didn't love this since I was like in elementary school. Like I have nothing under my belt, sort of thing. And so like I never tried. And so I was like, Kyle, like do it. And so Kyle's my brother. Like coming from that point of view, I just like want everyone to have like a passion. I just like want everyone to have a thing that they love and they like want to do for the rest of their life. And for a lot of people, it's like entertainment. For a lot of people, it's art, you know, not necessarily film, but like it's visual art or like whatever. And it's important to have diversity and representation in those mediums, because there's little children out there who are like, I can't do that because like I don't have enough, like no one else has done it before me, sort of thing. And so I would have loved that growing up. I'm like trying to think back to like who are the Asian Americans that like I remember from my childhood, and the only people I can think of are Michelle Lee from NCIS. I don't even remember her like her actual like her name, but she was like only in a few episodes. That's like the only one I remember. And like Mulan. And so it's like they're not household names, is what I mean. And so it's like when you have household names, that's when it becomes like real. That's when it's like, oh, like I want to be like the next this person, or I want to be the next this person, you know. Anyway, those are kind of my thoughts, but that was like a lot of rambling. But yeah. All right, and so the last thing we wanted to talk about doing this little like podcast situation, or like just show, I don't know what this is. But we wanted to talk a little bit about allyship and Black Lives Matter, and kind of what our roles are as Asian Americans in this whole situation, because we're still in Corona times, and at the same time we are also having this civil rights movement about African American lives and Black lives. And we want to talk a little bit about what that means to be an ally to that particular demographic. And so, yeah, so the thing that comes up for me most is the model minority myth and what that means for like minorities.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely feel like it's still definitely a prevalent stereotype / myth going on that Asians are doing so well. So if these other minorities aren't doing so well, it's their fault. They're not trying hard enough. I feel like it's definitely a way that society at large has kind of used Asian Americans or like Asians and the success you have seen, like it's obviously not, doesn't mean like every Asian person is like in that same success, doctor, lawyer, engineer, making lots of money kind of bracket, but has definitely used it kind of to further, I guess, oppress or like disenfranchise like other minorities, especially like Black people and Latino people and like other minorities. If Asians are doing this, like then you should be able to too, and it's like not our fault that you're not like reaching the same levels. You just don't have the same work ethic. You just don't have like la 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 la. And I definitely feel like Asian American culture as a whole has also kind of internalized that. If you work hard enough, you like reach this thing, and if these other minorities aren't, that's their problem. That's not our problem. Like we're doing well, and it's like not on us to like be thinking about how these other minorities aren't doing well. Like there's definitely like general bias against like other like minorities within like, Asian culture. I mean, just within Asian culture, like biases against different Asians, like there's going on. So, but that's another topic. So I definitely feel like it's a harmful thing, not only so far as like, affecting minorities outside of the Asian American community and giving a harmful kind of view of like what the ideal minority is, but also just like harmful in how it's been internalized within Asian culture and the expectations like people have for like Asians both within and without the community, like expecting Asians to be good at math and like to be super smart and be successful and like not be in the arts but be like in these STEM kind of deals, and just like these general expectations of being quiet and respectful and not raising your voice when like somebody says something like somewhat racist. Like you keep quiet and you keep working and you reach the top despite all that. People make it out to be like a positive thing, like, oh, aren't you happy that like you're stereotyped to be like a super smart, super great person? But it's definitely very harmful when like it's just like not the truth. Like not everybody is that kind of person. Like most people aren't that kind of person.
I think it's in the similar vein of the model minority myth, but I think actually for me what comes up for more often is being the invisible minority. Asian Americans are caught in this like your experiences are not as traumatic as like a Black experience or a Latino's experience, but there's no comparison. Like racism is racism, and none of us can understand the experience of another ethnicity or race. If anything, that statement should just be changed of like, I've experienced a different type of racism, and that should, if anything, compel me more forward to do something or to say something. And I think that the whole invisibility minority, I think, is also speaking to like, oh, just like keep your head down, don't do anything if something comes up. With Black Lives Matter, for lack of a better way to articulate it, it's like a prime moment to be like, we're not invisible, we have a voice, and our Black brothers and sisters are experiencing racism, not a racism that we can necessarily understand their experience, but as also a people group who have experienced it, like that only compels us forward more to do something, to say something, to listen, to protest, to advocate for. So I think that is, I guess, like a sliver of the model minority that is sticking out to me in particular. And the invisibility part goes in many different directions in many different industries. But yeah, I think also just like kind of adding into the like representation, like if you look at the stats, they literally show that ethnic minorities across the board are basically not seen at all in media. And it saddens me because whether it has to do with Black Lives Matter or just representation in general, like movies, film, theater, those are the same, movies, film, theater, TV, like as art makers, like it's our job to not only it's our job to hold up the mirror to the world around us. So my question is always like, why are we either the last ones to say anything, or why are we like the prime example that everyone uses of why representation and racism still exists? Like, why are we always like the prime example? Like, it's not to say that it shouldn't be true in other industries of like having equality and diversity, but I feel like entertainment is supposed to have had that, given just like the nature of art and film, but we're always on the chopping block first. So yes, I think it's just like, as not only artists and Asian Americans, it's like there's so many like ceilings and boundaries to be broken in this particular movement, and time. And it's like, that needs to get capitalized on to the best of our ability.
I feel like Asian Americans are definitely like in a unique position of, we are seen as like the model minority. We're the doctors, the lawyers, or the whatever, etc. I think it's like interesting because since we have, I guess, that kind of reputation, it translates to privilege. I think we have like a responsibility to leverage that privilege in a way that forwards equality and that forwards love and grace and all of those things towards everyone of all races. We have that like kind of mentality, I feel like, and this is just a generalization, obviously this isn't like, I'm not trying to, I feel like generations before me, like my parents, I get this vibe from them that it's like, it's not our job to like be a part of this Black Lives Matter movement. It's like not our job to help them, you know what I mean? And I think that can be a safe but also like dangerous mentality to have. Like, we do have responsibility, we do have like this privilege. It's important, and I think it's something that like also God calls us to do too. And it's such a like a hard line to walk, I think, too, because people are also just so afraid to have these types of conversations for fear of judgment or like for fear of being hurt and stuff like that. But I think getting down to the grit and like just like talking about it, it's like honestly can do like really great things. I think it's interesting and unique right now too, because we're in coronavirus, and it's like how do we do this safely, and how do we do this in a way that is like honoring to everyone, because this is like a movement that has had to happen for a really, really long time. And I just hope that people are safe and that the virus isn't gonna like downplay in any way, if that makes sense. As media creators, we have a responsibility as well, we have a privilege as well to make stories and put art out there that like forwards again that charge, that like that kingdom charge of like what it means to have all nations and tongues and people celebrating God. And so I think in order to get there, Black Lives matters, you know, like that has to be a thing that has to be reconciled, because there is so much hurt that has happened in that society, or in that for those people, you know, there's been so much hurt that has happened. So I think that's important as well. All right, so conclusion. Asian American representation is important. That is what we stand for. That is what we love. But also, as Asian Americans, I think we have a responsibility and a privilege to be able to help our brothers and sisters who are in a place of oppression. And I think it is important, especially as people who are in media and who want to transform media, to change that culture, to change that narrative to one that promotes the equality of all people and promotes the kingdom of God, which is defined by love and grace and justice as well. And so we love you all. Thanks for tuning in to our little show here. It's our first one. But yeah, so we're gonna sign off for now, but we love you, we thank you, and amen.